Hello everyone. This is Poonam, and I welcome you all to this talk by Dr. Souvik Mukherjee. It's on speaking to the missing player, subaltern poetics in Indian video games. Dr. Souvik Mukherjee needs no introduction at all, really. He's a world-renowned game studies scholar, and he's respected and loved everywhere. And he has written several books and several research papers on game studies, and he has also been recognized as a distinguished scholar by the Digital Games Research Association, commonly known as DIGRA. He's currently employed at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta. And by the way, this whole Game Studies India Adda thing is also a brainchild of his. And thank you so much for doing this, Souvik. Thanks a lot for giving all of us this community and this platform to talk about video games and engage with video games in a meaningful manner. Thank you. And with this, I hand over the presentation. I hand over the thing to Souvik. You may begin.
Thank you, Poonam, and well, greetings, everyone. I'm really honored to be here speaking to all of you. And yes, indeed, Game Studies India Adda is becoming more and more kind of like from a dream to a reality, which is fantastic. And I hope that we will move from strength to strength. And this is, I think, our sixth talk or fifth talk, and we will move on from this to further many other talks, hopefully. So I'm kind of, this is to be very, I'm just going to be very upfront here, very honest that this is a talk that I have given recently at the Jamia Millia Islamia University, the Digital Humanities Conference there. Zara was one of the organizers there, and but I've kind of reworked it somewhat to kind of speak to two of the earlier presentations. One was by both of them were by our very own members, Poonam Chaudhary and Souvik Kaur, and they also obviously I'm also going to talk about this fantastic game by Studio Oleomingus, who's kind of like one of the key figures of Studio Oleomingus is here with us, Dhruv, which is a huge honor. So I'm actually I don't know if you know my work at all, but I have worked on video games as storytelling devices for a long time, ever since 2001. So many years now, 20 years now. But later also worked on video games and post-colonialism. And what has happened is that in the recent times, as my work changes, as my thoughts have changed, the way I look at my earlier work has also changed a lot. So this is kind of a product of this changed consciousness regarding video games. And I've purposely put in a Potachitro from well, my own locality, really, which has the elements of the modern as well as the traditional in there. And just because, the Potachitra here is also a very visual way of telling a story, but it is not kind of one of those, it doesn't really kind of tell you exactly where to start looking for the story. So I guess the reason why I put it there is because, it is my way of telling people about kind of other forms of kind of storytelling, other kind of avenues of looking at stories and telling stories. So so my talk here is called Speaking to the Missing Players and Subaltern Poetics in Indian Video Games, and you'll soon see why I have named it this way. So I'm going to move to a very basic kind of video game screen, which I kind of started my video game experience with, Space Invaders from Taito. And you can see like the hordes of aliens descending on us, on the player, and the player has to keep shooting them. And there is a rudimentary element at a story here, but it's not a very rich kind of storytelling experience as such, but there is a very rudimentary element at a story which you can infer from it. And whenever there is a story, there is a or there's a story, then there is a reason for poetics. I mean, I've kind of spent the many years since I came back to India teaching Aristotle at Presidency University when I was working there, and the poetics has been like the staple for teaching literature for me. So I had to bring in poetics here in my presentation. So there is a poetics about how the story is told and how the plot is created, how and so on. So nowadays, of course, back in them days, there was an argument about whether there was a debate about whether games told stories or not. So ludology versus narratology and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to show you a clip from Red Dead Redemption 2 because I like it very much. And also because it kind of puts to rest any doubts that
Listen to
games
me.
tell stories.
We don't want to kill any of you.
Just for
but
a few
trust
minutes.
me, we will. Wake them up a little.
Those of you who haven't played it and have a good enough graphics card,
We're more ghosts than people.
Strongly recommend it.
You have got to keep faith. They will not crush us.
So you can see that this game, I mean, of course, from the trailer, that they're
my best friend.
Very much invested in telling a story.
Pair of hucksters trying to rob each other. Back in '78 or thereabouts.
You can also
listen to me.
Excuse me.
We don't want to kill any of you.
So as kind of from the very beginning, when stories in games have been discussed, they have always been accompanied by a notion of agency, and this is the notion that I want to talk about. So I mean, if you're looking at Brenda Laurel, who writes as early as 1991, she talks about theater. She wants to use theater to describe video games, not simply as a metaphor, but as a way to conceptualize human computer interaction itself. And the idea of enabling humans to take action in representational worlds. So to take action, and action is a very important idea here for kind of the video game medium and the story that is being told in the video game. And then, of course, there is this really cult book on video games and narratives, which is Hamlet on the Holodeck by Janet Murray. Janet Murray is a professor at Georgia Tech, and she's still there. And she was one of the founder kind of scholars of game studies. She and Espen Orsted both wrote their books in 1997, 1998. And thus began the so-called ludology narratology debate. And speaking from the narratology point of view, narratology, of course, is a misnomer here, but speaking from the narrativist point of view, Janet Murray talks about how agency is the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. So for narratology, one of the things that is so important for the video game story is agency. And agency, note this words, these words, agency is a satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. So our decisions and choices mean something, and agency is the power. From that meaning, we get the power, or we get the power to make the meaning from our choices. So the player is a powerful player, right? I'll come to all of this in a bit. I'm just kind of okay. And then in 2009, Marie-Laure Ryan kind of says that for the intensity of user participation, freedom of choice, and depth of immersion, nothing can beat the imaginary holodeck of the TV series Star Trek, which Janet Murray proposes as the model of the new kind of narrative experience that digital technology will make possible. So there is a lot of kind of talk today that you can wear an Oculus Rift or some VR device and walk into a story, and you can you can actually change the story as it happens. right? You can actually change what is kind of being told in the story, right? And one of the most important things here is that it's like seamless. You can walk into the story, you can do whatever you like, and you have freedom of choice. This whole idea of the freedom of choice is being described as very important. And finally, in another very important book on video games called Gaming Essays in Algorithmic Literature, Alex Galloway describes this as, if photographs are images, films are moving images, then video games are actions. So actions is an important thing about video games. So everybody is kind of very action centric, and also, uh, and this action is empowered action. This action is the action which has the power of kind of making choices, or which has the power of doing things, right? So that's kind of the way it has been described. And now I want to introduce to you, just explain this a little more in terms of Aristotle. So Michael Matthias, who is a student of Janet Murray, he writes that this neo-Aristotelian, sorry, I can't see my PowerPoint itself. Okay, just bear with me a second. I think I have messed up somewhat. Here we go. So this new Aristotelian theory integrates Murray's 1998 proposed aesthetic categories for interactive stories and Aristotle's structural categories for drama. And this theory borrows from Laurel's treatment of Aristotle's interactive context, but extends it by situating Murray's category of agency within the model. And I'm going to show you what he does with the model. Let me see if can you still see the screen? Is this screen still visible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, so if you look at this diagram, right? There is on the left, there is the material cause, which is the arrow which is moving up, and the material cause basically is from the enactment or the spectacle, what you see on the screen, to the pattern, to language, to actually in Aristotle the pattern is music, melos, but he's written pattern here, and a language, a thought, character, and action. So basically, from seeing things on the screen, you then kind of infer the action, and therefore it is the material cause is from the spectacle to action, and the inferred formal cause, that is why. Basically, what is the difference between a story and a plot? E.M. Foster puts it very simply. A story is a king died and a queen died, and a plot is a king died and the queen died of grief. So there's causality there, right? So this inferred causality is basically coming in from the action first, and then moving to everything, and then kind of being enacted on the stage or on the screen. So this is Aristotle. Now, Matthias says that for video games, it is different, because user action is so important and character is important as well. So instead of the material cause, this is also on on the side by side with material cause and inferred formal cause. Now, the user's intention is something that governs the spectacle. So basically, instead of the user being a passive user who is experiencing the play and then inferring the action later on, in video games, the user is creating the action and creating the enactment, the spectacle of the play. So that is the difference between Aristotle and kind of the video games, because in video games, then the character also becomes one of the character and the plot together. They become the important factor here, and then they drive. Then they actually drive what is seen on the screen. So now, another point is that in both of these models, the assumption is that the action is extremely important. And also in the second model, of course, the character is empowered and is making choices, but everywhere it is the action, it is the plot based on action, right? So this is what we get for our kind of theoretical basis of video games. And even today, when Matthias and others, they're working on what they call choice poetics, the poetics of choice. So choice matters hugely in this school, in this gharana of talking about kind of narratives, of video game narratives. So so we know that this is a very popular kind of a schema for make video game developers. It's called a hero's journey. So the hero has there's an initiation stage, and there's a call to adventure, refusal of the call, and there's a threshold, and then the hero has an ordeal, and so on and so forth. So and then ultimately there's temptation, and there's a roadblock, refusal to return, ultimate reward, and then there's a return. So this model is it's supposed to work for everything. So instead of Luke Skywalker being an orphan living with his uncle and aunt on the remote wilderness of Tatooine, who is rescued by aliens by the wise and from aliens by the wise and bearded Ben Kenobi, who turns out to be a Jedi Knight, here you can just strike it out and put in Harry Potter. Tatooine, put in suburbia. From aliens, instead of aliens, you can put in Muggles. And instead of Ben Kenobi, Hagrid, and Jedi Knight, you can just put in wizard. It's the same story. And I can do the same thing with Jesus, with Superman, with with Frodo Baggins, perhaps. Yeah, Gandalf also has a beard, right? So great. So it's this hero's journey that kind of is supposed to be the the master formula for all kind of narratives. And in this, then I'm kind of looking at a very Western notion of narratives here, and kind of looking at something that is very and this is supposedly works for everybody, right? All games, any games that you make, any Hollywood movies, anything. And this is the kind of narrative formula. And when we were talking about it last time, we spoke about kind of other sorry, excuse me. Yeah. So other kind of uh, sort of what if the hero's journey is not the only way of looking at it? It certainly isn't, and we have the heroine's journey as well, right? Where we have a very different kind of set of problems, set of issues, set of kind of steps, uh, which actually the heroine's journey is actually something that has been created by a student of Joseph Campbell, who actually created the hero's journey model, or the monomyth model. So there's a heroine's journey. What happens when we look at it from the woman's point of view? So it's not again, my point is to say that this notion of empowered poetics and the hero's journey, where the hero is kind of empowered with choice, and he does things which are meaningful, and therefore he has agency. This is probably not the only way of looking at things. And the reason why I say it is that in Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, this is a game that I continually kind of keep revisiting. And here you are playing as a freed former slave who is a pirate. And you can see how that is you. This character is you, Adewale. You can see how muscular he is, and how strong, and is this kind of like obviously this leader, this hero. But what if we are not telling the story from his point of view, right? Uh, what if we are not playing the story from his point of view? What if we are not telling the story, playing the story from his point of view? What if we are looking at the story from the point of view of these people, these slaves whom he is liberating? By the way, in the game, if you liberate a certain number of slaves, you actually can get you actually can get kind of points for that. You can actually upgrade your weapons depending on the number of slaves that you're kind of well, you're freeing. So well, freeing slaves actually becomes currency in a way, if you look at it that way. But anyway, so what about the people? These are also characters in the game. What if we tell the story from their point of view? What happens then? Right, the NPC, the non-player character, and of course these characters never speak. So just bear with me a second. Okay. Yeah. So then my question is there a poetics without agency for characters who do not have that empowered kind of sense of, performing meaningful actions? Is there a poetics without agency? And to talk about this, I talk about Gonzalo Frasca's Videogames of the Oppressed. Now, those of you who follow game studies debates will know that Gonzalo Frasca is the person who coined the term ludology. And he has an excellent essay on the ludology narratology debate. But many people actually miss his other work. This is actually his master's dissertation. It's like, I wish I had master's students like Frasca, and such a kind of interesting work. He's writing it in 2001, and he talks about the SimCity game, and he says that how the racial factor is excluded from the simulated model. So there are riots that are possible in SimCity, but they are only riots because of high heat or high employment. So they are only riots also because maybe there are some white supremacists who wanted to storm Capitol Hill, but there is no room here for the Rodney King factor. Again, there was this meme that was being shared that what would have happened if black people tried to storm the Capitol, and they would be like full of kind of policemen and soldiers, and they'll be shot down. So this is, again, I mean, even if there is a riot in the city, in the simulated city, the assumption is that it will be caused by heat or high employment. Heat, remember, yeah, people feeling too hot and they go on riot, but no room here for the Rodney King factor. Rodney King incident is very important at that point. It's just like our recent kind of BLM issues here. So there is no kind of scope for including race in the notions of riots. So there is no voice for the black people in the game SimCity. Actually, there are probably no black people in the game SimCity. So, and then the Sim, since deals directly with humans, its ideological assumptions can even be more evident. So what he proposes, he calls this the Sims of the oppressed. So this is a Sims that would allow players to modify, add, and discuss the simulation's model's core rules, particularly the ones that affect affect character behaviors. So he calls it, think of it as the forum theater with games instead of scenes. And I'll come to what forum theater is in a bit. But just to give you an example, so in this kind of paradigm, Frasca is actually allowing you to introduce, for example, if there's a family, then he allows you to introduce a character of the drunk mother, or the alcoholic mother, excuse me. The alcoholic mother version 1, alcoholic mother version 2, alcoholic mother version 3. In different versions, the mother then behaves in different ways. And obviously, it reflects things like poverty in the family, or kind of like depression, trauma, perhaps a history of kind of other abuse, and of course, substance abuse, and how that actually kind of affects, changes a family. Right, when we are assuming a family in Sims, we are assuming an ideal white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family, WASP family, with kind of with like the typical sloping roof house and an American flag flying outside, and food in the refrigerator and that kind of thing. But what about the problems that these some other kinds of families have? And this is what he's introducing into his Sims of the Oppressed, and seeing how players kind of play out the game, right? And he's calling it, think of it as forum theater with games instead of scenes. And I want to talk about what forum theater is. And forum theater is also part of what is called theater of the oppressed. by the Latin American playwright and theorist Augusto Boal. I don't know if you can read all of this. If you can, please read this, but I'll just tell you a story here. So forum theater works in a way where Boal says that the spectator is also the actor. So he calls the spectator the spect actor, the spect actor. So, so for example, you will have the theater playing out in a realistic, not in a realistic, excuse me, in a real situation. For example, let us say there is a character who starts a theatrical kind of, well, action in the metro station. Many people are waiting for the train and somebody just starts some kind of a, well, talking about something and a burning issue. And then other people don't realize, the audience doesn't realize that it's drama, it's a theater that's going on. So they all start kind of taking part in the theater. And often there is this, what forum theater does is it creates a scene of an argument. And once that argument is achieved, once people start thinking that they're fighting amongst each other or kind of arguing amongst each other, once they start kind of thinking from other people's perspectives, then the theater, the person who manages the theater, he says stop, and the actors stop, and then they reveal that this is an act that was going on. So I want to introduce this little incident that Boal talks about. And Boal is getting an award for for bringing theater to the prisoners. And what he does, he describes something that happens during the award ceremony. They also have this forum theater going on. And so in the first section, the prison guards are playing all the parts of themselves as well as prisoners, for which they have donned the uniforms of the sentenced men, and they're also adopting their physical stances. But in the audience, there are the children of the guards who are talking to them. There are the mothers, there are the family members of the guards, and of the prisoners as well. So as the guards are enacting the roles of the prisoners and the guards, people are talking. So there is a conversation that is going on between the families of the prisoners and the guards who are acting like the prisoners, who are acting as the prisoners, and the guards who are acting as the guards, and of course the people, guards who are acting as the system, like the jailer or God knows what, the government. And in certain cases, then what is happening is they're telling their own very private stories. Or in the second case, when there are female prisoners who are acting their own parts and their families are also in the audience, there are all kinds of things that are being said about their very personal kind of issues. Like the women prisoners staged the moment when one of their number, Amanda, they're telling her own true story, was separated from her 6-month-old baby, a child conceived in prison, a parting which the law ordained. So this woman has had a child, and her 6-month-old baby has been taken away from her. So that is what she's talking about. In the theater of the oppressed, things are shown as it, not only as it is, but also more importantly as it could be, which is what we live for, to become what we have the potential to be. This vital element is entrusted to the creativity of the audience. The spectators come on stage, substituting them for themselves for the protagonist, trying to find viable solutions for real problems. The audience, moved to tears at the sight of the mother kissing her goodbyes to the child, took her place a number of times, suggesting the construction of creches attached to prisons, run by prisoners on daily visits, etc., etc. Or yet other ways of avoiding having to break too prematurely the link between the mother and her offspring. So what is happening here is that the audience is kind of coming onto the stage, acting as the mother, and kind of trying to find solutions. And as they try to find solutions of kind of losing a 6-month-old baby, they break down and they start crying. So this is forum theater. Forum theater, if those of you who are in Bengal, it is actually practiced by a group in Modhamgram. But who are also kind of connected to Augusto Boal. So Frasca here says that he has based his designs on the main characteristics of Augusto Boal's theater of the oppressed techniques, which foster critical thinking and discussion by letting spectators become actors and enact possible solutions to personal and social problems. The approach that I propose for video game design goes, like Boal's, against Aristotle's rules for representation as stated in his Poetics. So this is Boal, of course, moves against Aristotle in his representation. And how? Because in Boal, perhaps it is not so much the primacy of action as kind of meaningful choices or as meaningful action, and of a certain kind of representation, of a unified one kind of representation. And it is not about kind of empowerment of having the choice to make meaning. So just to contrast Space Invaders, where we have the empowered player who is able to fight off the aliens, who has the choice to kind of take meaningful action to fight off the aliens. This is Frasca now kind of changes the mechanics of Space Invaders to address the people who are minor, who are not empowered, who can also, the same mechanic he wants to use to kind of address a problem of those people who are not empowered, those who are considered minor. In this case, homosexuals in a school who are being attacked by the bullies of the school. The bullies are shooting bullets which are called fag, 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 and the homosexual here, the group there, the gay group here is kind of responding with music. So this is Frasca's early work. And similarly, I have Elisabeth Laponzi, who also creates a similar game based on Space Invaders. She calls it Invaders. And here the invaders are the aliens who are coming in swarms, but this time the protagonists are the Native Americans, because it is the aliens who have it is the people from a different land who have actually colonized America, and it is the Native Americans who are trying to keep the invaders at bay. So it is a different way of kind of telling the story really, and kind of changing the story and changing the impetus on taking meaningful action, because in kind of these cases, there is always the notion of defeat, of the notion of being made minor, so I'll come to this again when we. So I have two games to talk about from India, which I want to use as my examples of games where we are looking at poetics without the agency model that Murray, Matthias, Marie-Laure Ryan, and others, Western scholars, have posited, a very Aristotelian agency-based, action-based model. So just show you a clip. If you're not familiar with this, then. So what happens when you are a character who is like this is a role-playing game where you're a missing girl who is being trafficked into the world of prostitution, world where millions of girls are lost every year. Players assume the role of the missing person, making choices and assessing the risks for themselves to find their way to freedom. But what if these choices are not meaningful choices? What if these choices are not choices that empower you to take meaningful action? What if these choices are, what if you are an individual? Like we showed, Matthias shows us how the character is important. But what if the character is not an empowered character, a hero or a heroine, or So missing is actually based on real life kind of statistics, and where it's based on a trafficking kind of story that is based in Sonagachi, which is one of the largest red light areas in Asia. There are, you can read the number, right? So there's like a huge number of people, living in modern slavery in India. Sonagachi, however, uh, is actually the creation of the British colonial system. Uh, and what happened was that in the in the mid 19th century, the British actually created something called, they had the Sexual Diseases Act, and they wanted to keep their army, the soldiers, kind of free of sexual disease. So they created what was called an artificial ring fence around Calcutta. So they therefore they kind of created, they created hubs of prostitution in certain areas of Calcutta, and then they kind of like uh, made laws in such ways. And even today, prostitution is kind of is kind is not legal in India. Therefore, and but at the same time, it goes on. So there's a lot of stigma, a lot of illegal trafficking and whatever that becomes possible. So this colonial kind of thing that was created back then, obviously it continues today. And then the question is, then what happens when you are the trafficked person, when you are that you have to kind of like think in terms of that character, those characters, really, when the character in the Aristotelian kind of scheme that Matthias talks about is the character that cannot take meaningful action. And you can see the response to the game was quite interesting. I just kind of got a few responses from the Android Play stores just to show you. And you see how people kind of really kind of respond to this, with this kind of feeling of helplessness in a way. uh, One of them is saying that when I started, I did not like it because I have to pay 500 and 600 every time, and it gets frustrating because I never get enough, because the people with most cash, they don't pay that much, but the people with more lust and less case have a better chance of paying less. I uninstalled. So he's basically actually trying to think like, he's forced to kind of now earn money as a prostitute, but he's having all these kind of he's finding it frustrating in a sense, because he's saying that people don't with most cash don't pay that much. People with more lust and less case have a better chance. So it's kind of like forum theater. He's been or he or she has been introduced into this, and they're kind of like making these kind of assumptions of something that they probably wouldn't have. And one of them says that, very heart touching. I always wonder why streets in Kolkata has this number, but now it's clear, which really made me sad. And I completed this game within more than 1 hour with all my curiosity. And then another person says that I do not think it's appropriate for teenagers or kids to play due to the fact that you have to sell your body to get through the game. Also, rape is involved. This game sends out negative messages. So as if kind of like trafficking does not involve rape. Okay. Um, Somebody says that this game tells us the story about human trafficking. It made me feel angry and also sad. Not all girls are willing to do that. It's as if this last sentence is quite worrying, because it seems like women actually engage or allow themselves to be trafficked. Somebody else says low-key racist game. Personally, I don't feel sorry for anyone in a country where multiple people object to something and then they do nothing but run away and even fail on that. So you can see that there's so many different responses. And another person says that the controls suck, but I don't mind. I didn't feel comfortable playing this game, but that's the point. I got the chills all over. Horrifying. 5 stars. Wow. And the controls suck. Why? Because they're used to kind of letting the game kind of respond to their controls, to their controls, to their wills, to the choice making. But the game is not kind of doing exactly what they want, what they're used to in the standard kind of video game culture experience. And of course, the game is extremely uncomfortable because it takes away from that kind of notion of agency. This takes away from the meaningfulness that Janet Murray is so confident about, right? So, I mean, I'm just kind of giving you a sample of random quotes, really. Honestly, I haven't picked them out kind of really very carefully. I've just kind of picked whatever I could find. But looking at these, even these, and you can see that this is really varied kind of response to this game, and perhaps the lack of experiencing agency in that sense. And let Satyajit, who made this game, do a little bit of the talking.
Not so limited. I would have started the game itself from the village life, where the player has to make choices, and as the game progresses, we can understand how and why the girls get trafficked by playing the game. And that's a major portion of the message and the awareness that we couldn't do in this game, that we missed. And I would like to kind of do that. There is another part we never got in depth with the characters. The several characters are playing in this world. Like, everybody has their own stories, and they have their inhuman sides, and we never got kind of in depth into those characters and their stories as well. What is the exact problem with?
So I described this video as what is missing in missing, because there is so much that remains to be done, that remains to be told, and that remains to be represented. And whether it can actually be represented in a game medium is also a moot question. But there is like so much that is in potentia in this particular game, and a game which actually makes you feel less empowered and question your agency itself. And now I come to another game, and I don't know if Dhruv is still with us, but this is a fantastic game which I'll let you kind of look at first because of its pure visual beauty, and then so this is a game called Somewhere, and I'm just going to read a little bit out from what the developers have written. And in one interview, Dhruv actually writes that he compares this. Sorry, I can't see my own screen. Excuse me. So he says that somewhere like the city of Kayamgarh does not exist, and says you're right. It is always meant to be seen through the occluded lens of our other work. In that, it is a little like R.K. Narayan's town of Malgudi or E.M. Forster's Marabar Caves. Marabar Caves in a Passage to India. A trope of post-colonial fiction stretched to the extreme and applied to the very telling of the stories. Now, it's interesting that he compares, it says that it is a city that somewhere like the city of Kayamgarh. So this is set in a city of called Kayamgarh. I'm just going to jump a little bit and kind of move to the other quote by Dhruv, and then the other one, and then explain a little bit. So the people in the story reduced into single entities because they collide with each other on a map, an amalgamate of characters splitting apart in a mitotic act of generating replicas with errors in their recollection of their narratives. This is how the fissures and views and stories now manifest themselves in the game. So the people kind of reduce into single entities because they collide with one another on a map, and then they amalgamate, and then they split apart. So again, kind of, if we are looking at character, if we're looking at character and agency and meaningful action, I mean, here we do not kind of, I do not see at least these kind of characters in that kind of strict Aristotelian sense working out, really. Um, so I'm going to jump a slide and then go back again. So here, this is this fictitious kind of journal that they've made, a journal of Charles Henry Conington, who's this colonial official, and it's been restored and translated by another fictitious character, Mir Umar Hussain, in 1962. And here he says that the people of Kayamgarh, they don't speak. They're afraid that their words might penetrate the layers under which their bodies are hidden, afraid that that some phrase or name might, through woolen caps and cotton plugs and bald bits of torn rags, buried ears, and insert themselves into the thoughts, prompting them to think. Prompting them to think of Kayamgarh not as they see it, but as it is being described to them by the person speaking these words. It is a fear so deeply entrenched that the people now see the city with unwilling eyes, shaded behind their hands, lest they be tempted into a sudden burst of verbiage while looking upon the wonders of Kayamgarh, a temptation that might resist the doctrine of their self-imposed silence. For Kayamgarh is a wonderful city where craftsmen strive hard to put into form all that they cannot give words to, and where the work of the craftsman is left undisturbed, for it is only looked upon and but never described by the people who never speak. And this is so interesting, because the people of Kayamgarh, they don't speak because they're afraid that their very words will actually change what Kayamgarh is for them and what they themselves are. And so it's kind of a city that is not spoken about. And I wonder if the people of Kayamgarh can ever speak. Can the subalterns speak in that sense? Can they ever speak? Can they ever articulate? And if they did speak, would they be heard? If they did kind of gather the courage to speak and see if the city doesn't change, would they actually do that? And would they even be heard? So this is a really strange kind of a surreal kind of scenario that we come across, and therefore. The game itself, and like the city of Kayamgarh, doesn't exist because it is almost not spoken about. It is difficult to even speak about it. And therefore, perhaps I see how difficult it is to kind of construct a poetics of action around such a concept, such a game, really. And it's interesting that Dhruv compares this to the Marabar caves in Forster, because in the Marabar caves, it's just kind of, these caves are not like Ajanta and Ellora and other places, but there is this weird sound, boom, 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 that kind of echoes in the Marabar caves, and it's just kind of something that that nobody can ever make any meaning of. Anyway, so the people themselves are also, they collide into each other, and then they become different, and they break apart, they become different. So it's very difficult to say who is what. And although it is not clear who we are playing in both these short experiences, Jani says that somewhere will mainly follow the travels of Aziz and Azam, a duo of thieves who trade in forgeries. The pages they have duplicated come from the journals of Charles Henry Conington, the explorer who first discovered the legendary Kayamgarh. As the player joins them in tracking them down the rest of the pages, they transform into various other characters, take on different identities, some of whom only exist in the imaginations or stories of other people. So how am I going to bring in Aristotle and the hero's journey is my question. So, and then, of course, one of the stories that Jani tells in his games is called the Museum of Dubious Splendors, and Souvik Kaur presented on this earlier in an earlier kind of an earlier presentation for this series, and. I'm a Museum of Dubious Splendors, excuse me, and I'm kind of like intrigued because what does a museum do? and being situated in this colonial well environment uh, where the museum is supposed to kind of present to us, and Shobik has spoken about how the museum is called Jadughar or Ajib Ghar, a magic house and a house of wonder and so on and so forth. But museum is supposed to bring to us our culture, and as the museums are constructed in two ways in the European kind of sense. They're either synecdochic or metonymic. So either they take a part of something and then that part is supposed to represent the whole, or they bring the whole structure in to represent a part of that culture. And and the Colonial Museum would do quite a lot of that, really. And it would also kind of decide for us what was to be considered culture, and also give us a sense of this agency as to kind of being able to determine through choices what was our or what is our culture. So when I started going to the Indian Museum in Calcutta, I was really amazed to see this, and I keep going and I keep seeing this, and I'm equally amazed every time. This thing is this entire installation in a huge room in the Indian Museum. This is one of those colonial buildings, British buildings, and huge ceiling and all that, very high ceiling. And the whole thing is the Bharut Stupa. So I would wonder, if there is the Bharut Stupa is in the Indian Museum, what is there in Bharut? Probably nothing. Right, because the British decided that they needed to move the Bharut Stupa to Calcutta so that the people of India would see it and realize and know what their culture was all about. I'm sure there are some random little bits and pieces scattered about in the houses in the locality, but the Bharut Stupa does not exist in Bharut. It is there in the Indian Museum, and it is there because somebody has decided that this is how it should be. Again, a notion of kind of meaningful actions. But consider these. I don't know if you know about these. These are megaliths that are there in Jharkhand, all across Jharkhand, Chaibasa and other places. And these are actually burial spots. These are spots which are venerated by the people who lived there and in their cultures. And some of them are probably burial sites. Some of them are sites of veneration. Somehow, colonial anthropologists have not considered it worthy to bring these into a museum, or to kind of talk about these being worthy of kind of being spoken about as cultural elements to be kind of brought in. So then what, I'm kind of thinking about kind of how one can conceive kind of showing culture in a museum, and also in terms of this museum of dubious splendors, where where the very idea of kind of colonial anthropology of museology of kind of showcasing culture is then kind of questioned and undercut. So I'm coming to my close here, where I want to then start thinking about a poetics of centerless agency. If we actually have to have agency at all in poetics, that's my first question. But then I do not think that even the simplest dislocation of text in interactive fiction requires a slightly. So I do like to think, that even the simplest dislocation of text in interactive fiction requires a slightly altered form of reading and criticism, and that takes into account not just the reader's agency, but also a reader's labor in assembling. This is what I had a discussion with Dhruv Jani, and I'm kind of quoting some of what he said. So he says that he wants to think that it is not just about the reader's agency, but also about the reader's labor in assembling the narrative together, and the intricate ways in which you can arrange and entangle stories, not just in most video games, but in most hypertext containers like websites, etc. might make it useful, easy to build other kinds of fictions better suited to such chaotic ideas and incomplete records. So where the subaltern does not have an archive, the subaltern does not have an archive, where there is no archive, where there is no structure that the colonial authority has given us. What about those stories? And what about stories of the people who are kind of the non-player characters, who do not have that agency? I think Dhruv's point here is quite valid here, that it is about kind of a slightly altered form of reading and criticism. That is what I'm talking about as a poetics of centerless agency. I sorry, I just thought of this term because of Dhruv's extremely well poetic titles. So I thought this would be, if I were to make a game to kind of well follow in this in the footsteps of Somewhere and Museum of Dubious Splendors, this would be the title of my game, a poetics of centerless agency. So basically, the arranging and entangling of stories, and the readers labor in assembling, but the reader may be anybody, may not be a person with kind of that empowered sense of making meaning. The reader may not be a person who is moving the Bharat Stupa into a museum for display in a certain way. The reader may just be somebody who is in the villages of Chaibasa and for whom the narratives lie in the megaliths, which we never look at. So in my own work, I have talked about the illusion of agency, the making ludic of agency, the making illusory of agency, and choice is a decentered phenomenon. It is not a prerogative either of the human or the machine algorithm. And these entities themselves occur as supplements to the other. But I now even question the very idea of a meaningful choice. Even in the illusion of agency, the notion of meaning is something that I kind of question. And therefore, yes, I stick to what I said earlier in my 2014 book about choice being a decentered phenomenon. So then my question then is that what about representing those people who have, or those entities that have little choice and even lesser agency? Should their stories not be told? Can video games which have remained centered on the global north address such stories as often relevant to the post-colonial scenario? And I will here kind of talk about my favorite story from Mahashata Devi. It is called Pterodactyl, Puran Sahaya and Pitha. And let me just move to this next slide. I'm almost done. So okay, where is it? I think I'm, just bear with me a second. Right, I think I'm missing a slide here. Not a problem. But this is a story of a pterodactyl that has been drawn on the caves, the subterranean caves in a place in Madhya Pradesh where there are tribal people who are settling there, and after now there's a whole question of kind of whether there is a real pterodactyl. This is not a science fiction story, but this is just what happens is that the people, they say that there's a pterodactyl that has come and settled there and it died. And as soon as it dies, the person who has told the story of the pterodactyl loses his voice. He does not talk any longer. Like the people in Somewhere, he does not talk. So Gayatri Spivak says that for the modern Indian, the pterodactyl is an empirical impossibility. For the modern tribal Indian, the pterodactyl is the soul of his ancestors. The fiction does not judge between the registers of truth and exactitude, simply stages them in separate spaces. This is not science fiction, and the pterodactyl is not a symbol. The pterodactyl dies, and Bhikia, the boy struck dumb, buries him in the underground caverns of the streams, walls resplendent with undiscovered, quote-unquote, undiscovered cave paintings. Undiscovered by whom? Undiscovered by civilization, by European civilization, or by the civilization that we follow, really, by the colonial civilization. So this in the pterodactyl, the story, what happens is that upon drawing the figure of the pterodactyl, the Bhikia, the person who's the silent storyteller, he actually he falls mute, and thereby becomes the pterodactyl silent guardian. Puran knows that Bhikia can hear him. He has only stopped speaking after he drew the picture. A paradoxical, wordless interpreter, Bhikia's muteness and illiteracy suggests that what he is protecting cannot be verbalized or written down. So this is about kind of what cannot be verbalized or written down. This is about what cannot be expressed in the standard archival, the colonial archival, or the neoclassical kind of philosophy of the global north. So it is not kind of it is not something that can be put into the standard notion of the written archive as was given to us by our European colonizers. And what happens to that story then? My question is about, so the story of the pterodactyl is something that is going to remain untold, really. Just like the story of Somewhere, perhaps, and the Museum of Dubious Splendors, and of many others that we have kind of talked about earlier, will remain not told in exactly that hero's journey form, really. So what happens to those stories? And it is for these that I say that this is not the only form of poetics. And for this, then I also use Augusto Boal's comment here. Aristotle constructs the first powerful poetic political system for the intimidation of the spectator, for the elimination of the bad or illegal tendencies of the audience. This system is to this day fully utilized not only in conventional theater, but in the TV soap operas and Western films as well, united through a common bias in Aristotelian poetics for the repression of people. But obviously, Aristotelian theater is not the only form of theater. And again, Boal, what he means is that this whole idea of catharsis, as Aristotle sees it, and this whole idea of meaningful action as well, I'm tagging it on to Boal now, that is an assumption that is very, very comfortable for TV soap operas, Western films, yes, but it does not tell the story of many people who have who have suffered oppression. It is actually kind of something that removes certain voices altogether. And perhaps if we start thinking in other ways, in other forms of poetics, we will be able to talk about these voices, the silent voices, and not necessarily in terms of heroes and heroes' journeys. So yeah, I think that's me done. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you so much, Souvik, for presenting this wonderful paper and leaving us with so many questions, wonderful questions actually. And it's going to take some time for me personally to really let all the things that you spoke about to sink in, because the questions that you asked are so, I mean, I don't even have adjectives or ways to describe them. So thanks a lot for this talk. We really needed to talk about something like this. So now we shall move to any questions that people have.
Is there... Okay.
Okay, so I think the first, is a big question from someone. Right. Okay, first of all, we have Abhishek Varghese, and he asks, how important is the role of credibility in shaping NPC behavior in a game? Abhishek, would you like to ask the question yourself, or is it okay that I read it out? Okay, so yeah.
I think it's fine.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on the
Uh,
question, Abhishek?
Yeah, could you
Yeah,
tell me a little more about?
yeah. So basically, the thing is, when you're playing a game, you're not thinking about it in terms of the right or wrong, right? And like you're not really playing it for so much the realism, but more about what is the right or wrong is decided by the player's credibility, like what he thinks is the right or wrong thing. And so I was wondering, like, how does that figure into the non-player characters? Like, you're talking about the game missing and the actions of the players and all that. So I was wondering, how does this idea of the credibility figure in the question of the non-player character?
This is a difficult one really to, I mean, what do you mean by credibility here? I mean, I'm just kind of trying to get the parameters clear and then I'll address it. What is your how do you interpret credibility?
Right. Basically, for example, when you are playing a game like Missing, like, for example, there are players you might make a certain choice in the game, which might
Uh-huh.
be morally wrong, probably. But
Uh-huh.
like from the player's perspective, that's justified, right? Like it justifies his experience of the game. So like I look at credibility like in that context, because in games like this, what is more important is the player's credibility of what he deems is the right or wrong. So like
So maybe not credibility, perhaps. I mean, but maybe the players kind of notion of what is right or wrong. I mean, if that is what you are talking about, then uh, one of the ways of determining that is through authorial intention, where the developer is already kind of scripting a certain kind of pathway, whereby, for example, in Half-Life 2. Right, you are in City 17. It's a monorail narrative. You get on start the game when you are on monorail, really. And then you kind of move in a certain way. The Combine are bad characters, and there is the G-Man who comes in and gives you stuff randomly. Or in something like Witcher, where the right and wrong is a little fuzzier. But generally, we will want to side with Geralt of Rivia, but at the same time, you know that he has his failings and all of that. That is there. But my point was about kind of NPCs. NPCs. I mean, how far do we even think or want to tell the stories of NPCs? Witcher actually tries to do that in a sense. Witcher actually is a little sympathetic and self-reflexive ways. With the Witcher talks about sometimes the monsters that Geralt kills. He says that he himself is like a monster, or the monsters are themselves not really monsters; they've been made monsters, and that kind of thing. But in and in I think it varies from game to game, really. And I think I mean, my point was not so much about kind of uh, about shaping NPC behavior. My point was about kind of actually allowing for narratives that keep getting suppressed by a hero's journey type of uh, storytelling, by something that kind of grants agency as meaningful action, as to be the main driving force in games narratives. So I've just shown two different examples, and both of them very lucky for us that they come from India, because obviously we have a very different kind of notion of poetics and notion of representation, um, quite different from the West, really. And regarding Missing, I did not understand your question. I did not understand the example. Actually, I don't know if I've really managed to answer your question, but I mean, the way I understand it, I think what I wanted to say was I was looking at how the voices that are not represented, um, how they can be represented, or even if they can't be represented, at least there is an attempt to kind of bring these voices into the discussion, or at least acknowledge their existence, uh, instead of kind of placing it in an agency action as meaningful kind of choices kind of paradigm. That is what I wanted to say here.
I hope that answers your question, Abhishek.
I don't know if I've answered your question, but
yeah, like it makes sense. Yeah.
okay.
All right, moving on to the next question. I think Shamu Roy has a question that he would like to ask you directly. Shamu?
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Souvik sir. Thank you so much. That was a great talk. with your reference to that little game by Frasca, which was like this anti-LGBTQ
Yes, yes.
depiction where the LGBTQ people was like protesting with music. So it reminded me of this infamous game called Bully, by Rockstar.
Yeah,
Now
Rockstar, yeah.
there, yeah. So well, one might argue that they use that mode of satire, but my question is, if you are dealing with a sensitive issue, sorry, like bullying in school environments or whatever, is satire or a mode like that an appropriate mode to take, or should have been handled in a much more sensitive way, perhaps? Because speaking about the oppressed, actually. So yeah.
Yeah. So the reason why I showed it was basically because I was trying to show how a very simple game mechanic like Space Invaders assumes a master narrative of a hero being able to. It's almost like a hero's journey kind of thing, where there is meaningful action. You are killing the aliens, and America will be great again. But Frasca obviously has changed the mechanics using the same mechanics. Really, he's actually looking at a group of people who are marginalized and not represented, right? Uh, just as Elizabeth Lapanzi is doing again in the same way. Although the logic of action and all of that, there might be problematic because but they're actually looking at an other group of people really, or other groups of people using the same kind of game mechanic, and kind of telling a very different kind of tale there, or addressing very different issues there. With Frasca's kind of portrayal of the LGBTQ issues, my only defense, Shamo, is that he's a master's student at this point, and it is one of his very early works. And it's probably you have a point in this. Perhaps this is about up to debate really, whether satire can be a way of representing LGBTQ issues. I am not somebody who can comment on queer theory, LGBTQ issues, and
No,
whether.
actually,
But
I was not commenting on Frasca's work. I was actually trying to get a view of Rockstar's Bully. I just wanted to include Frasca to draw a connection to what you said in the talk. My actual question was based on Bully and how Bully
Okay.
shows that whole bullying thing with a rather twisted vision. So I wanted to know what you think about Bully's representation of the oppressed.
Well, I mean, it's very controversial, isn't it, Bully? Because on the one hand,
Yes.
uh, I mean, Rockstar never manages to, you know, do anything without controversy, even if they're very well-meaning. So I'll leave it at that. I think I'm not going to I'm not going to kind of engage with Bully, but you know what I mean. I'm sure between the lines. I mean, I've kind of communicated what I wanted to say. Um,
Yeah. I got
yeah.
you. Yeah, thank you.
So yeah.
All right. I hope that was a great answer to Shamu's question. And now quickly moving on to Aditya Sen's question slash comment. Would you like to speak to Shovik directly, Aditya, or should I read out your comment slash question? Aditya,
I can read the question.
no,
I
no.
don't know if Aditya is here, but I
Uh,
think he's left us. But I can answer
Aditya
this
is saying that
question.
please read it out. So
Okay.
Aditya says, thank you, Shovikda, for the wonderful discourse on choices and the narrative that builds around the choices and the poetics around it. I was thinking of a couple of games that I absolutely love playing. Number one, the Stanley Parable, where finding the story itself is the game, and the choices determine the end of the game. Also, it is a narrative storytelling experiment that challenges the player's agency of choice and free will. The other game would be Playdead's Inside. Interestingly, the NPC in the game builds the entire story, however, without speaking. You keep wondering till the very end about the story. 1 second. Yeah, you keep wondering till the very end about the story. The symbolism makes you wonder. And I would be very happy to hear from you sometime on these games. Thank you so much. Aditya says, yeah.
I think it's kind of it's really it's very interesting comment really, and Stanley Parable, and how kind of it challenges the poetics of agency and free will. Absolutely, because it's kind of keeping on undercutting the notions of choice and free will, and self-reflexively commenting on it. And the other game that you mentioned, I haven't played it. Played its inside, and it's fascinating concept where the NPC builds the entire story and without speaking. Again, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of synergy with what Dhruv is doing here as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think I totally agree with you. I've written on Stanley Parable in my book a while ago, where I've actually talked about this notion of agency and displaced agency, decentered agency, and all that. But now, I would of course this particular talk was taking it from the angle of subaltern studies and subalternity and all of that, and I think perhaps so is kind of Stanley subaltern. Is Stanley does Stanley really have a voice in this? And what is Stanley here? I mean, it can be really usefully analyzed in terms of postcolonial theory, race, and other issues. I've not tried doing that, but yes, a POCO analysis of Stanley Parable would be fantastic, I think, because you are actually kind of, you receive instructions on the tele, and then you're being told to do certain things, and there is an omniscient narrator who's telling what Stanley is supposed to do, although Stanley can do things differently as well, and that there is already a disjunct between the Aristotelian narrative that is being forced on you, and your own actions, and that disjunct is also different from Matthias, because it is not about agency per se, because what Stanley does is not never really terribly meaningful. It's quite existentialist, absurd in a way. So for me, Stanley Parable, doing a postcolonial analysis of Stanley Parable would include subaltern thinking, and also Fanon, existentialism, all of these things punched together, really. So very fascinating that way. And the other example that you have talked about is again fantastic, about how the voiceless builds the narrative. Of course, I mean, thinking of let us think of those megaliths that I showed you. Those megaliths actually they're voiceless, right? But the moment we kind of give some thought to these megaliths, yeah, they are telling a story, and they are actually telling the whole story, really. And somehow these voiceless megaliths, when you walk around Jharkhand, will tell you so much. And just like the NPC, which is kind of also building a story without kind of, and at the same time, you keep wondering what the story is. It's just like with the megaliths, you never know what the full story is. So yeah, sorry, a roundabout answer, because I haven't played the second game.
Anshuman also mentions Playdead's another game, Limbo, and he says, without speaking, reminds him of Monument Valley.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and Limbo as well. You've mentioned Limbo, so I will take again. These are really fantastic examples, and you notice that all of the games that you have referred to are mostly indie games, and they're mostly outside the canon of kind of the traditional AAA game making, which is very sadly like Assassin's Creed. Right. If you have to make a game about an escaped slave, yes, he has to be the hero, and then there's the story, and this all these things have to happen, really. So, uh, so I wonder if kind of, uh, and I know that Shamo earlier made a comment about this reminding him of prop. This is again, yes, of course, very very formalist. And this formalism is something that I'm trying to argue against, because this formalism works for some cases, but not for every case. And just like, I mean, yes, kind of, by all means, spread your Aristotelian poetics, but not in my name. So by all means, kind of, talk about these in uh, as the way of kind of accessing storytelling in games or narrative in games. But I mean, then we have a lot of things that are not represented in these games. Rockstar, you brought Rockstar up, and I hesitated to deal with it, but Rockstar opens up so a lot of these issues, right? The first Grand Theft Auto has a it has something called the Govinda section, right, where you can drive over this little beetle-like orange characters, and there is this, and you get lots of points, and then there's the something that comes on the screen which says Govinda. That's actually basically the people that these are people that you're running over. Hare Krishna, they call them the Hare Krishnas, but they're ISKCON. So the sheer joy that the Rockstar developers feel that one should have in driving over the Hare Krishnas. Well, but then my point is very simple. What if I were not the driver? What if I was were the Hare Krishna people who were being driven over? Ladies and gentlemen, I have lived in America, and I have felt like that sometimes. That imagine those people in kind of the orange robes and with Indian faces walking down, kind of crossing the road, and then being run over by some of those really speeding cars. It's a different. I mean, my point is that what about the voice of kind of those that are not represented, those that are other, and why? I mean, obviously there is a reason why they're rendered voiceless, and I think, well, Limbo is a beautiful story. Of course, some people compare it with Dante, Purgatory, and all of that, but there are many multiple meanings that one can make out of Limbo as well. I mean, I could do a hero's journey reading of Limbo very easily, but it also allows itself to other interpretations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Next, Dhruv from Studio Oleomengus says that, yeah, that the presentation was wonderful, and he mentions a short game that grapples with a lack of voice slash agency in very clever ways, called The Last Survey by Nicholas O'Brien.
Wow,
Would
Dhruv,
you
I
like
don't know
to?
if you're there, but thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, that was really wonderful. Thank you, and it's incredible to see what we had as a brief conversation only a month ago to end into such a coherent project.
Well, I think I was plotting an Aristotelian plot to kind of bring you into my presentation in some way, but you see what you said actually makes so much sense to in the way I look at it. The whole labor of assembling voices instead of having this kind of concerted agency. And I don't think you knew that I was thinking on these lines or whatever, but because I was just generally asking you from your own kind of talk, it was a genuine question. Uh, but I haven't read this. I haven't played this game. Sorry, read this game. I played this game, but
So it's a very small, visual novel, interactive fiction piece, and where you play as a surveyor, and you are working for a mineral mining extraction company. And the entire game is one conversation that you have with one of the directors of the mining company, essentially trying to tell them and convince them that the mining company and the world at large is running out of ore. That there is no more ore to be mined. That is what your survey has concluded. And it is beautifully illustrated, and it's full of these intricate seeming choices. But the inevitability of the conversation is, you start with the inevitable conclusion of the conversation, and then the rest of the game is just the way you negotiate that that very uncomfortable dialogue. So it's quite beautiful.
It sounds like a Latin American novel to me. I don't know whether you say Marquez or Borges, but maybe
Yeah.
Marquez.
Yeah.
It's like that inevitability and then kind of reach and.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned another game in one of your interviews, an American game. It's very famous, California. I don't know if you remember. Which you actually see some synergies with your own gaming, your own game development. I'm just trying to remember, but it'll come back to me. Write it in a second. But but then I don't know if you want to respond to this kind of comparison with Monument Valley and Limbo as well, because I didn't know if you were here, so I didn't
Yeah, no, I
bring
was
you in.
just, what I find fascinating, especially when you look at a lot of these indie games which challenge player agency in very clever ways, is they start with a dramatic reduction of visible or accessible space for the player. So Monument Valley is a brilliant example of that. The entire level is captured on a single screen, and you're rarely negotiating superhuman scales of game environments like you would otherwise do in, say, something like Assassin's Creed, where even buildings and traditional physical geometry and topology is accessible to you in dramatically different ways, compared to NPCs or other players altogether. Whereas Monument Valley or Limbo, your movement through game space tends to be very prosaic and often very labor intensive, because they're puzzle games, repeating a lot of action over and over again in very simple ways. And this is something that we started thinking about a little while ago, but we think it's very it's a very useful tool or a technique to curtail the expectation of space and how we move through it, and as a way of addressing player agency or or challenging it perhaps.
So instead of an open world, it's a very kind of kind of shrunken topology, which kind of therefore reduces the affordances or the notion. I mean, Michael Matthias is talking always they talk about affordances, but it reduces that really. And so I don't know what you think about the poetics. I mean, what is the poetics of somewhere? I mean, I've tried to give it a spin, my own spin here, but I wonder I've always wondered about the poetics of kind of designing. Somewhere as it stands now, I don't know what will happen. What will happen?
We don't have, partly deliberately and partly in response to how disordered the project is. We don't have a coherent poetics for somewhere. The idea is to keep shifting the character that you center a narrative around over and over and over again, especially the character who gets to be, to a certain degree, the author, while you're playing, until you start to question how stories are being constructed and dismantled within the space of somewhere. And that language itself and the act of telling stories, or the privilege of doing so, is constantly questioned in the process of telling them.
Fantastic phrase, the privilege of telling stories. This privilege, I think, is a very global European, North American privilege, really. I mean, we do not have the privilege of telling stories in some, I mean, my spin on your kind of work is basically that it is not possible to have a coherent poetics. I mean, exactly. I don't know whether that's what you say, but I mean, maybe you say that you're not having a coherent poetics, but it's I'm looking at the coherent poetics being continually displaced, really, which is why the spectator and all of these kind of because in Boal's work as well, he's challenging, and again he's coming from South America, he's challenging the very idea of kind of the coherent narrative that is being put together, agency, catharsis, whatever, because it kind of keeps changing.
It also the more disorganized the narrative becomes, or your ability to posit the narrative in one particular place, location, or across an arc, or locked to an author, the more at least people who stick through the games, who suffer through the games, the response tends to be more compassionate than it would otherwise be, were they given greater agency over, over the narrative.
Yes.
Seems to be a very handy trick, if you will.
So yeah, I mean, for example, with missing, you see, if you look at the responses, some of the responses are because the agency is not granted. Therefore, there is a feeling of kind of resistance, and
Yeah.
some for some, then they want that missing has more. Well, it's more conventional than your games in that sense,
Yeah.
in the plot structure. So there is an expectation of the conventional game on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are problems, there are issues with missing, which is at the end of the missing, you actually resolve the problem because there's a fight sequence and all of that. But in the very kind of I mean, some of my students were traumatized because there's a rape there, which is not kind of made, but it's implicit, I think. No, not implicit, it's kind of semi-implicit, but it's quite traumatic. And basically that removal of kind of agency is some with some of these responses, basically with the standard, with the usual gamer, it doesn't sit very well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a jarring, I don't know, I mean, an experience of, of what
Yeah,
a video game is.
the discomfort is a wonderful testament to how far it can subvert people's expectation,
Yes.
but also how much they are, at least while they are playing it, forced to imagine that they are bodily subject to that kind of an oppression.
I think we have other questions. Do we, Poonam? Sorry, we actually
Yeah, we
launched
do. We have, but not
Yes.
many. We have Jeffrey's question.
Okay.
I think, Jeffrey, would you like to speak?
Hello, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, hello. How are you doing? Are you there?
Jeffrey, okay. Yes, I'll read out Jeffrey's question then. So Jeffrey says, that was a wonderful presentation, given that games like Assassin's Creed 3 try to put the player into the shoes of the subaltern. There are still issues like politics of representation, where the game, in the process of marketing itself to an imagined audience, mainly the West, adopts a tone that is still framed to explain concepts in terms of Western conceptions, including stereotypes. Case in point would be the descriptions provided by Sean Hastings to the player in The Animus. I am interested to know your views upon this conundrum.
I think better than me, Adrienne Shaw will answer this question for you in her article in Loading. It's open access, but I will still try. I will try being Adrienne for some time and see if I can do justice to her points. I use this essay quite a lot, and I'm a big fanboy of Adrian Shaw. Although I don't think I can ever imagine myself as a fanboy really, but yes, I'm a big fan of Adrian Shaw's work. But the thing is that what she says is that this whole idea of kind of taking the Native American name, the Native American personality, and then of course I mean kind of fighting George Washington, whatever. But she points out how limited Ubisoft's kind of sort of way of accessing this is, how kind of how Ubisoft is kind of unable to do justice to Native American kind of thinking and the history of that particular period. So I mean, she she already, I mean, she already, whatever I've just said to you, she kind of says this in much better ways. I'm trying to find, just bear with me a second. I'm trying to find her exact quote so that I can read it out for you. Just bear with me a second. I've just used it recently, so I will, yeah. So Adrian Shaw shows how, despite Ubisoft's attentiveness to representational politics, there is a problem with the way history is constructed in this game, and it presumes an audience which is more likely to identify as not Native American, even as they're asked to identify with Kanyen Kihaka or Mohawk protagonist. Shaw notes that in Assassin's Creed, Paris could uh, be more accurately rendered than Constantinople because the city's development was preserved and easily accessible by to the French design team. Uh, so from these examples, the absence of a codified narrative and in some ways an inability to engage with the diversity and multiplicity of non-Eurocentric perspectives directly affects the game algorithm. So basically, the whole assumption of kind of that Shaw makes here, sorry, the whole assumption that the game here makes is of a white person playing the game as a Mohawk protagonist, and whether that assumption itself is valid, of course, is a huge question, right? I mean, how can the assumption, the game assumes that the player is white, and the player as a white man playing as a as a Mohawk person. So that itself kind of undercuts the very fact that that the voices or the representation could have been done in a different way. It's trying to it's trying to represent a character who is a non-white character, but assuming that a white person is going to step into the shoes. In a way, I think in my earlier work, I talk about this as identity tourism, echoing Lisa Nakamura. It's like you step into a role. It's like a suit that you step into, like a Native American suit that you wear. Like it's like a fancy dress ball. That is what Assassin's Creed 3 seems to me sometimes.
All right. I don't.
So that
And
was very harsh, but yeah.
so I see another message from Anshuman. He mentions the game called The Unfinished Swan. That also happens to be in my Steam wish list. I'm also very interested.
I haven't played it. It should be on mine as well. And
Very interesting names Anshuman has told us. So
yes.
I think we have enough questions for now. I would like to, I have just one question slash, I'm just wondering that even when, just thinking, so even when suppose, because when you are making a game, you are, most of game developers, most of these gaming companies, they are usually privileged, right? I mean, in terms of the Indian subcontinent, they are usually upper caste male developers who are creating these wonderful games. So I'm just thinking that even if they make a playable or non-playable character, give them a voice, how authentic would that really be? Or that might just be, you know, feeding into stereotypes that we already have about certain communities or certain, you know, sects of our society.
It is a very difficult kind of problem to address, and but it is a problem. It is an issue that is going to be addressed or raised in at least in many platforms now and to come. Um, uh, so about 2 years ago, or no, 3 years ago, I was chairing a panel in the NGDC, the last NGDC. Now it's an IGDC, but on diversity in kind of game development. And again, you also mentioned male. Of course, we have now recently interviewed for our own podcast series Purnima Sitaraman. But most of the games that are made there are made by male developers, and again there's the issue of caste as well, which wasn't addressed in that forum. I mean, we raised it. Padmini Ray Murray actually raised it, but it was not really discussed much. Now, or indeed any position of kind of mm, of disadvantage, of kind of othering, of difference, or what have you, basically. any position that is not the majoritarian position is kind of something that we do need to think about, and this is why the need for thinking of a subaltern poetics, or I call it a subaltern poetics, for a different kind of poetics, because to, I mean, what we say about kind of Western notions of kind of walking into an identity, and that the same thing can apply in many kind of local contexts as well. So but then we are generally in game studies, the reason why I actually thought there was the need for this talk, or this kind of a talk really, was that because the assumption is always of a default hero's journey, or a formalistic kind of way of rules to kind of explain how a game works. But we are not talking about a game or the game. We're talking about many games, and the number of games that you have now put on my Steam list are all very different games, right? And they come from very different perspectives. But at the same time, I will say that the game, just like forum theater, it is see, Augusto Boal as a theater of the oppressed is an interesting example for me, because it can actually involve many different kinds of the oppressed. There is no clear definition of who the oppressed is. The oppressed might be the Bengali peasant, might be the Italian peasant, might be the prison guards in a Brazilian penitentiary, might be anybody, right? And that gives those persons the kind of framework to start talking about their problems and tell their stories from multiple voices, really. And that is something I think we should also think about, that games allow us to do, right? For example, my favorite example is Ian Bogost, when he says that a Catholic priest was playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and I've used this example elsewhere, and he did not want to engage in the violence, and instead he took photos of all the people engaging in violence, and then he put up an in-game blog or something, condemning violence and whatever. So it gives, the games give that kind of opportunity to people to play differently, and of course, I'm again saying that I personally like the game experience that is chaotic, that is not kind of tied, that cannot be tied down to an archive or a system of formal, just like Dhruv was saying, basically, where other representations can be made possible, right? Now, how far that is, there is a catch here, because when I design a Native American protagonist, uh, as a white kind of European person or American person, there are bound to be some kind of constraints from so it's kind of, I'm speaking for a character. How far is it possible to speak for that character? And in that sense, in the spectator scenario, the character speaks for himself or herself, and changes the character, himself or herself changes the character. There is no character per se in the spectator scenario. But I mean, it's always very difficult to achieve, because there is when you are scripting a kind of particular game, then of course, whether you call it upper class male or the various other kind of a certain, let's say, religion or whatever, what have you, certain identity, class identity, all of these, how far is it kind of possible to keep them out? That is a moot question. And that's perhaps where game studies should really go in thinking about this poetics, if we are going to think about a poetics at all. I would rather we keep the book aside.
I mean, yes, that's something we really need to look into as we go ahead. Maybe in 10 years, maybe. Let's see.
It is going to happen for sure. I'm looking at kind of a less formalistic kind of game studies, perhaps. That's it.
All right. I think we're done with all the questions and all the comments and all the game suggestions for now. So I think it's time that we close this talk.
Thank you so much, Poonam, and thanks all of you for staying. It's been like 1 hour 50 minutes. Oh my God, I am so sorry, but thank you very much for staying,
But it
and
was the best. It
thanks
was the
everyone.
best 1.5, one and almost 2 hours in a really long time. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk,
Thank
Shobhik.
you very much. Thanks.
Thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions and comments. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Bye
See you
bye.
next week. Yeah. Bye.